that the president has made from time to time is that he doesn't understand the argument about how gun ownership could stop these mass public shootings, because he says that if the United States had, has so many guns, that we should be the safest country in the world as far as mass public shootings go. What he doesn't seem to understand is the fact that if you own a gun at home and you don't have it with you when a mass public shooting occurs, it really doesn't do much to help protect you from the mass public shooting. And so the issue there is gun-free zones that you have, and as I said, we'll get into that more. But the issue there is whether or not people can have guns to protect them, not whether they own them at home and the number that's there. Now, when you make international comparisons, one of the problems is that data on mass public shootings is really easy to get in the United States. It's much harder to get in much of the world. And for a lot of developing nations, it's almost impossible to get. Particularly for researchers who go back and look at things in the past. They want to say, okay, not just what's happening now, but what happened 10 years ago. Are there any lawyers in the room here? No, that's interesting. Well, anyway, if you're a lawyer, you'll be used to using things like Nexus and Westlaw. These are computerized databases of news stories. And you just enter certain search terms, and any of the news articles that over the whole period of time, the decades that they've collected this, are stored there permanently. Google News searches are somewhat problematic when you go back in time. News stories tend to drop out the farther you go back in time, but if it's a mass public shooting, you're still going to get a lot of stories, at least on ones in the United States, even a couple decades after these cases have occurred. The thing is, for a lot of the world, their newspapers haven't been on the internet. And if they have been on the internet, it's only been for a very short period of time. So it's very hard to go and get this type of information. There are a couple other problems that you need to know when you're making international comparisons. One is murder rates in some parts of the world are so high, they can be 20 times what they are in the United States. Killing 4 people is kind of like, it's not a news story. Killing 8 people isn't a news story. There are cases in Africa that I can find where 30 people will have been killed, and they'll get like 1 news story on it, because it's just happens so often that it's just not considered particularly newsworthy to write much about it. You'll have cases, and I'll show you some later, where they'll say, you'll have initial news coverage and they'll say, at least 50 people killed. Well, in the United States, if you had at least 50 people killed, I guarantee you that there'll be some follow-up news stories that will say 54 people ended up dying. You'll know exactly. You won't have to be stuck with saying, well, the best I can say on this is that at least 54 people were killed. But it just gives you an idea of kind of the differences in news coverage around the world on these things. I'll give you one final example, and that is when I was putting together these lists of mass public shootings around the world, I can't tell you the amount of time I spent on this and hiring people that had different facilities in different languages. But I had done searches over a lot of the Pacific and just haven't been able to find anything really in terms of mass public shootings occurring. So one of the assumptions, well, maybe they're not occurring. I just happened to come across a report from the National Police for the Solomon Islands, an island chain which has about 500,000 people in it, that looked at the period of time from 2001 through 2005. And during that time, and they had this 300-page report, and they had one paragraph in the report that mentioned that they had 3 mass public shootings that had occurred over those 5 years, where at least 10 people have been killed. And they said, wow, that's pretty amazing. Because they hadn't been on the internet for their newspapers beforehand, so you couldn't find it. So anyway, I decided if they have that many in this 5-year period of time, maybe they have lots of others in other years, and I just haven't been able to get the police reports for them. And so I called up the National Police Service there, And I said, do you have information on the number of mass public shootings that have occurred over time? I found this report for this one period, but I haven't been able to find it for other times. And the guy said, nope. And I said, well, do you have like some rough idea? Could you point me to someplace? He goes, nope. And I said, could I fill out some type of Freedom of Information Act request? And nope. And it was pretty obvious after a short period of time that this guy was going to be of zero help to me. And I finally found out what was going on there after talking to him for a long time, and that was, look, they have a policy. Most of the revenue for the Solomon Islands comes from tourism, okay? And they get like no benefit from having some kooky researcher in the United States write a report that may get some news coverage that goes and talks about all the mass public shootings that they have in the Solomon Islands. You know, the only thing that can come of that is bad news. And so they weren't going to help me. And they weren't going to have anybody who could help me. And even the newspaper in the Solomon Islands wasn't going to help me because they were kind of in on, you know, trying to protect tourism. And I suppose I could have flown to the Solomon Islands and maybe gotten through old copies of the newspapers to go and read it, but that was a little bit too much. But the thing is, when you have I'm going to be showing you information on mass public shootings from 1970 up to near the present day. But the thing is, when you have a small area of like 500,000 people that have 3 mass public shootings where you have 10 people or so killed, that's a huge rate. I mean, an annual rate per capita, you have to adjust per capita. They're way up there, even if they didn't have any other mass public shootings over the entire rest of the time period that's there. And so one can only guess how much higher it is. And by the way, Solomon Islands banned guns in 1999. So all these mass public shootings basically occurred after the guns were banned. So, and I have to tell you one other part of the story. One of the reasons why I spent extra time looking at the Solomon Islands and eventually found, after I can't tell you how much time, this police report, was because I was debating Paul Helmke, the former president of the Brady campaign. And Paul, I kept on asking, when I debate gun control advocates, I kept on asking, can you name me one place in the world that's banned guns that's seen murder rates go down after the ban? And they keep on saying they can't name a place, which you think should be pretty telling. You think you should be able to name at least one place where guns were banned and the murder rate went down. Every place it goes up, and often by a large amount. And you know, basically just shows that when you ban guns, it's basically the most law-abiding good citizens who turn them in relative to criminals, and that you may take some guns away from criminals, but if you primarily disarm law-abiding citizens, you actually make it easier for them to go and commit crime. So, you know, it's something that sticks in their craw. And anyway, one of the debates I was doing with Paul, who I've debated multiple times, he said the Solomon Islands is a place where murder essentially ended after they banned guns. So I started looking around at it, and the funny thing is, the source that he was using just stopped reporting firearm homicides. Not that they didn't keep on occurring. I could keep finding them. It's just this, and they never checked it themselves. They just used this place out of Australia that's trying to keep track. Anyway, enough of those stories. But the point is you got to be careful when you're looking around. It takes a lot of effort. And the bottom line for the numbers I show you, I'm sure I got all the mass public shootings in the United States. I'm virtually certain I got all the mass public shootings in Europe. But I'm fairly confident I haven't gotten all the mass public shootings in Africa. I'm fairly confident I haven't gotten all the mass public shootings in Central America, where they have astronomical murder rates. And so what I'm going to show you is that these other places have much higher mass public shootings than the United States, and it's even worse than what I'm going to show you, okay? you know, if you just compare the European Union to the United States during the Obama presidency, you know, it kind of seems relevant given he's the one who's been making these claims. If you use the traditional definition of mass public shootings, which are 4 or more people killed in a public place, not involving gangs fighting against each other or some other type of crime, where the point of the crime was to go and kill people. Now I have to tell you, at the end of the Obama administration, they changed the definition of mass public shootings to 3 or more people for political reasons, I think, just to make it look like there were more of them occurring. Hopefully, the Trump administration will change it back. But if you use that definition, over the entire time, there were 29 mass public shootings in the United States and the European Union. The rate that people were killed for mass public shootings in the European Union was 0.08 per million people. In the United States, it was 0.089 per million. The rate that people were injured, though, in the European Union, so it's slightly higher in the US than the European Union. The rate that people were injured was more than twice as high in the European Union per million people than it was in the United States. And so if you look at total casualties, which is deaths plus injuries, it was about 50% higher in the European Union than in the United States. I'm not expecting you to know this. My book, The War on Guns, has all these numbers I'm going to be going through in detail if you're interested in getting a copy of it. But if you look at the mass public shootings during the entire Obama presidency from January 2009 through January 2017, there were total casualties of 527. If you just take France, let's see, do I have France in person? If you just take France in 1 year, okay, so just for 2015, so you have 4 mass public shootings. I haven't updated this for later ones, but you have Paris, Roya, Paris. You have 4 mass public shootings in 2014. They had 532 casualties. So France, just to give you some perspective, France, in a country that's 1/5 the population of the United States, had more casualties for mass public shootings in 1 year than the United States had in 8 years. So it's 532 versus 527. Okay. Now, and here's for the European Union. I don't have the whole thing because it didn't quite fit on here for all the years, but from 2009 through the end of 2015, you can see here the casualties for the European Union. You had about 295 deaths and 675 injuries. So you can see the European Union had a lot more casualties than the United States did over that period of time. Okay, now if you break it down by country, you got to adjust for population sizes. You don't want to compare, you know, Macedonia or Switzerland or Norway or Slovakia. Norway is 4 million people. You would expect, just based on population, they should have fewer deaths. Or Switzerland, I guess, may have like 7 million people. So you got to adjust for population here. And you can see, if you do it on a per capita rate for the frequency, which was one of the multiple claims that the president made, the United States ranked 12th over the period from January 2009 to December 2015. I haven't updated this, but it's similar. And if you look at it for the annual death rate, the United States was 11th. It's about 20th if you look at casualties. And this is the numbers for France.
Did you pick that date range because that was Obama's presidency?
Yeah, that's what I said. Right. And there's other things. Bloomberg did a report that started in 2009.
Did it jump, like from the second President Bush to Obama?
No.
No, it's okay.
Anyway, okay, so here's the stuff for France. You can see the huge casualties. I just mentioned one interesting thing. So you had the 4 mass public shootings in France during 2015. Some of these things, like when they had the truck attack in last year in Nice, in which 80-some people were killed. The guy was firing from his truck. All I know, I can't tell you how much time I've spent trying to go over reports to find the breakdown of the number of people who died from being hit by the truck versus a breakdown of the number of people who died from being shot. So maybe traditionally it makes it look like everybody died from the truck, which could be possible. But I'm just telling you, I don't know. And there are a couple other cases like that where you can read the news reports or contact the coroners and they will be of no help to you in trying to get that information. So here's a list of mass public shootings in the United States from 1970 through March 15, 2016. And I have here like the worst 25. And now there's a couple others that have occurred since then. There's the Orlando attack, in which 49 people were killed. That would be probably 16. I can't tell you for sure because this is one of these cases where this attack in Pakistan, the news accounts always say at least, more than 45. So whether it's more than 49, I can't tell you. But if you take it at 45, the Orlando attack would be 16. And then you have the Istanbul attack on January 1st this year, which would also be in the top 20. That would actually be 12. So, but you can see here, you have cases. I have to tell you one other thing. I'm excluding cases which involve fights over sovereignty. I'm looking at what cases where the government's defined as terrorist attacks. If I were to include kind of struggles over sovereignty, this list would be much longer. I'll give you an example. You have the school shooting about a decade ago, well, 12 years ago in Russia. Place starts with a B. But basically you had Chechen rebels take over an elementary school. Right, okay, I knew it started with a B. Right, exactly. And they killed like 385 people and wounded another 600. And but that was Chechen rebels fighting for Chechen sovereignty there, so I didn't include it. And you have a number of other cases like that, but that clearly would have been the number one case there if I had included it. And you can see here you got Nigeria, Pakistan, Kenya, France. This is the November attack. Nigeria, India, Philippines, Norway, and Kenya, Nigeria, Philippines, Nigeria, Pakistan, Tunisia, Nigeria, India, Nigeria, Australia, and Italy. Oh, one thing you realize when you start going back through these things is when you go into like the 70s, the 80s, and the early 90s, you have all these communist groups going and killing people. You may not remember it now, but they have people go into airports with machine guns and start opening fire on people. But the Beiner Meinhof gang and others, they've kind of disappeared and been replaced with Muslim terrorists. One other thing that's interesting here is if you look at this list, in the top 20 cases, or top 20 cases, only one of these cases didn't involve a Muslim doing the attack. All the other ones involved Muslims doing the attacks. So you make a comparison across these continents and areas, just for comparison now I have to tell you, for these comparisons now, I limited it at least 15 people killed. I know the traditional definition is 4 or more, and I use the 4 or more when I'm talking about Europe compared to the United States, but I became convinced, as I was trying to explain to you earlier, that I have a hard enough time even knowing I got all the ones with 15 or more people being killed. And when you're talking about 4 or more killed, there's like absolutely no way that you're going to get even remotely close to the correct number of cases. And even when you do pick up a case or two, it's so common, they don't even bother telling you what happened in the news story. So I can't even see whether it fits the traditional FBI definition. And at least with 15 or more, I'm pretty much more confident I'm getting most of the cases. And there's a high correlation, I think, between 15 or more people being killed and the other more traditional definition. But if you look at this period of time, what you find is that just the difference between the per capita rate in the United States and the rest of the world. In Africa, the per capita rate from deaths from mass public shootings is at least 155% higher than the United States. The rate in Australia is at least 223% higher than the US. Europe, it's about 25% higher. India and Pakistan, it's about a third lower. The Philippines, or Israel, is just off the chart, not too surprisingly. It's 1,359% higher than in the US. The Philippines are also substantially higher, 337% higher. So, I mean, these are real differences between the United States and the rest of the world. So this notion that these just never occur in the rest of the world is just ludicrous. I mean, one just needs to go back and look at the list here of these cases. I have to say one media bias question that I'll mention to you. There was a report that came out from this professor in Louisiana on mass public shootings. Got a lot of attention, made the front page newspaper of every newspaper in the United States that was of any major size, made it around the world, claiming that a third of all the mass public shootings since 1974 had occurred in the United States, and we were by far the highest rate. I asked him for his data, and he refused to give it to me. He refused to even explain how he got it. I got calls from like the Washington Post, and they want to know if I could comment. I said, well, I haven't seen it. Could you show me a copy? And they said, no. He says we're not allowed to show it to any academics. I said, that's kind of strange. So anyway, the paper finally came out in January a year ago, and he doesn't even explain in the paper how he did his sample. And I said, he doesn't even break it down by continent. I said, can't you give me at least a breakdown of how many cases you got from each country so I can see whether or not you're missing cases or not, if you're not going to give me a list of the cases? And I said, can't you tell me what data sources you used or what languages you searched in or anything? And the answer was no. And the thing is, I was telling the newspaper reporters this. I said, look, you guys are giving us all massive coverage. Can't you insist that he at least tell you the list of cases that he has here? Can't you at least have him tell you how he searched for these? But you know, it fit their kind of tablet on what they believed to be the case, and so they just ran with it. They didn't really care whether he would show it to others or not.
Mr. Lott, on that slide, is that after Australia disarmed?
This is the whole period of time, 1970 through January 30th, 2017.
Right. When did Australia demand gun turn-ins start?
1996 and 97, and it was before the beginning of January this year. And anyway, they didn't disarm. We can go through Australia. They have licensing rules in effect, and there was a buyback, but it's a misnomer to say that they disarmed. So I want to talk a little bit about gun-free zones. If you look at, and I have a long chapter on this in the War on Guns. If you look at the period of time from 1950 through July 10th, 2016, what you'll find is about over 98% of the mass public shootings, again, using the FBI definition, occurred in places where general citizens weren't allowed to have guns for protection. About 1.6% occurred in those places. And, so I kind of already talked about Obama's quote about, guns was a solution, we wouldn't have mass public shootings in the United States. The thing that most people don't seem to understand completely is that, or a lot of people don't, is that the huge strategic advantages that terrorists have. When you put a police officer to go and guard a facility in uniform, That's like an impossible job if that's a real target. If a terrorist were to go and attack there, they have several options. One of the options is, if they're going to go do the attack, they're going to kill the officer first. And whether you look at things like the Charlie Hebdo attack, the first people killed there were the police officers guarding the place, or the Orlando shooting where you had an off-duty police officer there in uniform who was shot at, or you have the Istanbul attack that I mentioned, or I can name you multiple others. If a police officer was there, they were the first people shot at. In the Orlando attack, the guy ran out of the building there when he was being shot at, so he wasn't killed. But in lots of other cases, the officer is the first person killed. It's an impossible job, and also in the sense that it's difficult to be on your toes minute after minute, hour after hour, week after week, month after month. It's a boring job to be there just in case somebody's going to go and attack someplace. It's very difficult to be on your toes all the time. Plus, you don't have eyes in the back of your head. It's simply there are too many angles that somebody can go and attack. You have people walking by you or near you all the time. You just simply have no, forewarning that any one particular individual there might be the person that's going to start attacking you and kill you. And so, our hearts and thanks should go out to these officers who are guarding these places. But, you look at some of the policies that have been adopted after mass public shootings around the world. You have cases like after the Charlie Hebdo attack in January 2015. What was the President of France's response? Well, the President of France put 10,000 military troops on the street in order to guard the city. I mean, that was a joke. Look at it this way. If you put 10,000 troops on the street, not all of them are going to be active at any one time. They got to sleep. They're on for 8-hour shifts. Not everybody works 7 days a week. You're talking about maybe 2,500 troops on the street at any one point in time. Well, with 2,500 troops guarding a city of 2.3 million people, it's simply impossible to come even remotely close to guarding all the possible targets that are there. They could have had 100,000 troops. They could have had 200,000 troops. And they still wouldn't have been able to go and guard all the possible targets that were there. Maybe it made them feel better that they were trying to do something, I don't know. But Israel has had to go and deal with this type of problem, terrorist attacks, even before it was a country. And for decades, their response was, when there would be a terrorist attack, to go and hire more police or put more soldiers on the street. But they eventually realized that no matter how much money they spent, there was no way they could cover all the possible targets. Let's say you have two police officers on a bus, and you have a terrorist there. Well, what can the terrorist do? He can kill them first. He can wait for them to leave the bus and then start to attack people. Or he can leave the bus himself and look around for some other target. And what Israel learned is if these terrorists are simply willing to be patient long enough, they're going to find some target that's not being guarded. And basically what happened when you get to 1972, Israel realized that this was impossible, and so they started allowing civilians, licensed civilians, to carry guns with them for protection. And that took away the strategic advantages that the terrorists had there, because you may be able to identify the police officers that are there, but if you go and start shooting the police officers, you reveal your position. And if there was somebody with a gun behind you or to the side that you didn't notice, you revealed yourself and they could take you out. And so it made it much more risky, much more costly for terrorists to go and do attacks. Does anybody know how the terrorist attacks changed after that date in Israel? Right. Do you read my book? Okay. Well, it was in More Guns, Less Crime, actually, as that discussion. And anyway, exactly. So what they did was, so you go and have a vest bomb or something like that, and you set it off, there's not really a lot to respond to at that point. And I actually have a quote in the beginning of More Guns, Less Crime, where there was a terrorist attack in a suburb outside of Tel Aviv shortly after they changed the law in Israel to allow civilians to carry. And there were 4 terrorists that went into this mall, started firing, and the civilians, this is on a weekday afternoon, school day, the civilians in the mall pulled out their handguns, started firing back. 3 of the terrorists were killed, the 4th one was severely injured. And the reason why I included in the story was, in the book, was because the terrorist who was being taken to the hospital, the attendants in the ambulance were talking about how he was so upset and just complaining that nobody had told him that these middle-aged ladies in the mall had guns with them. And he kind of seemed to take it as an affront to his manhood that these middle-aged ladies, it was a school day, middle of the afternoon, school wasn't out yet, had taken out his whole terrorist team that was there. One thing you may not know, up until July last year, France banned its off-duty police officers to carry their guns with them off-duty. And the Bataclan Theater, you may not know this, but the lead for the band that was playing there revealed that there were 8 off-duty French police officers who were in attendance in the audience when the attack occurred, but that none of them had their guns with them when the attack occurred. And those police officers believe that they can stop. They had a benefit concert later on afterwards, kind of in memorial and to commemorate the attack, where the band went back and played in the theater again. And fortunately, those 8 police officers survived, and they were in attendance when the band leader said when they did their concert to memorialize the original attack. And he asked them at that time whether they were armed at all the police officers were carrying at that time. But one can only imagine how that attack might have turned out differently. And France at least changed its policy. I had a piece earlier this year in the Wall Street Journal about how much of the rest of Europe, though, is still refusing to change its laws to let police carry off duty.
Question.
Why don't we wait? So, anyway, I wanted to go through a quote by Ron Noble, who for 15 years was Secretary General of Interpol. It's kind of Europe's version of the FBI. And though they're much broader around the world in terms of that. And when Noble first went to take over the job as head of Interpol, he believed gun control was the solution for lots of problems. But what he learned was that, look, if you're going to have a terrorist mass public shooting at an event, you have 2 options. Either one, you can really make it a gun-free zone, or 2, you can let people go and defend themselves. But one thing that he learned, he said, he gave an interview a couple of years ago to ABC News, was that it was basically impossible to really create a gun-free zone. That these terrorists are well planned. They plan these attacks 6 months or a year or 2 years in advance. And the notion that you're going to be able to keep terrorists from bringing guns into a movie theater or into a mall or a restaurant or someplace else is just not serious. That these guys, you give them enough time, they're going to figure out how to get weapons into these facilities, even if you put metal detectors out at the doors in front. And so he basically came to the opinion that since you're not going to be able to create a gun-free zone, the problem with having these gun-free zones is it's going to be the most law-abiding good citizens who are going to obey the ban, and you're going to make it relatively easier for these terrorists to do the attacks, because it's simply impossible for the police to be there at all these possible targets. And as I mentioned, even if you put 1 or 2 police officers there, they have an impossible job. They're the ones who are going to be attacked and killed first. So it's just interesting to see even somebody like the Secretary General of Interpol, though I'm not sure if he ended up being removed. 15 years, though, was kind of a record for somebody being in charge of Interpol. But whether it's some kind of comments like that may have cut short his tenure. Anyway, Bill Landis at the University of Chicago and I did a study on mass public shootings, where we looked at all the mass public shootings in the United States from 1977 through 1999. We looked at 13 different types of gun control laws. And the only one that had any impact on mass public shootings was the passage of right to carry laws. That when states adopted right to carry laws, there was about a 2/3 drop in the rate of mass public shootings, and an even bigger drop in the rate at which people were killed from these attacks. And to the extent to which these attacks still occurred in those states, they overwhelmingly occurred in those tiny areas within those states where permanent concealed handguns weren't allowed. You know, one way to think about this, you live in Wisconsin, or look at most other right to carry states, maybe with the exception of Illinois and a couple places, but you have, 98, 99% of those states, you're able to go and carry your permanent concealed handgun with you into public places. There's only a few places where you're literally banned from being able to go and do that. If these mass public shootings were random, then 98 or 97 or whatever percent of the mass public shootings would be taking place in those areas where permanent concealed handguns were allowed. Instead, they keep on occurring in those tiny areas where permanent concealed handguns aren't allowed. You look at things like, the movie theater shootings. You have cases like the Aurora Batman movie theater shooter from, 4 years ago, where you have a situation where there were 7 movie theaters that were showing the premiere of the Batman movie within a 20-minute drive of the killer's apartment. Only one of those movie theaters posted signs banning permanent concealed handguns. It wasn't the movie theater that was closest to the killer's apartment. It wasn't the one that advertised itself prominently as having the largest auditoriums in the state of Colorado, which you think would be an attractive target for somebody who wanted to kill as many people as possible. Instead, it was the only movie theater that banned permanent concealed handguns. You look at the Lafayette movie theater shooting more recently. Again, the person went to the movie theater that posted signs banning permanent concealed handguns. You look at the mall shootings, like in Omaha, Nebraska. You have 8 enclosed malls. The killer went to the only mall that posted signs banning permanent concealed handguns. You see similar types of things in the Kansas City mall shooting or the Salt Lake City mall shooting or the Portland, Oregon mall shooting. At some place, at some time, you'd think people would realize that these types of attacks simply aren't random. And, the thing is, I have a chapter in the War on Guns where I try to go through and have some quotes from some of these killers, how they explicitly talk about, in many cases, thinking about whether or not somebody is going to be there that might be able to go and stop them with a gun. So the Aurora movie theater shooter, his first target was going to be an airport. But when he checked into it, he was worried that all the security there with guns would kill him before he could go and kill his targets. You have other cases that I go through there. The Charleston church shooter. His first target was going to be Charleston College until he found out about the security that was there. You have a case last year in Detroit. Fortunately, the attack didn't occur where a man was concerned about his son's involvement with ISIS, had contacted the FBI. The FBI put a tap on his phone and recorded an amazingly chilling conversation where this young man was talking about attacking one of the largest churches in the Detroit area and decided to pick that church that he had picked because it was one church that had banned people from having permanent concealed handguns on church property. And he explained to his compatriot how that made it an attractive target because then he could go and kill lots of people and not have to worry about somebody being there with a gun to possibly stop him. But you find these types, so it's not just the statistical evidence, it's also that these guys are consciously thinking about whether or not somebody there might be able to stop them with a gun. Well, I appreciate your time on this. I guess, the bottom line is simply that there are a lot of mass public shootings around the world. The United States, despite what you might think from the media coverage, is relatively safe.